Hi, I'm Mia Freedman, and you're listening to No Filter. This episode is a bit different. Instead of asking the inappropriate questions, I'm going to be answering them. Yeah, I'm in the hot seat today, sitting across from one of the world's most formidable interviewers and journalists, Leigh Sales.
Let's quickly run through some other issues, Prime Minister, starting with the economy.
We recorded this interview in front of a live audience as part of the launch of my book, Work Strife Balance. And if you only know Leigh from her work hosting Australia's leading political and current affairs program, 7:30 on the ABC, you are in for a very special treat. Because in this interview, as well as learning a bunch of stuff about me that you didn't know, you'll see a very different side of Leigh. She's hilarious, she's warm, she loves a laugh, sometimes she gets teary. She's a really good singer, and she's a true woman's woman. Listening to this interview, I think you'll get the sense of what it's like to be friends with her, because she's an incredible friend. Watching her craft this interview, I asked her to just do this as a favour, and it was on a Sunday, and she's so busy and she's got 2 little kids, and I was so chuffed that she said yes. I didn't even want to ask her because I didn't want to put her in a difficult position, but she said yes immediately. She helped promote the event. And she prepared. Oh my God, the woman prepares. She puts me to shame. She knows me pretty well, but she had this list of questions. She read the book twice. It was enormous fun and kind of awe-inspiring watching her prepare. And Leigh is truly at the top of her game right now. And watching someone that you love and admire soaring to such great heights is a real buzz. In our conversation, we talk about work, strife and balance, funnily enough. We talk about friendship and all the things that women talk about when we're alone in front of 300 people. Here's me and Leigh.
Now, I was very happy to do this for lots of reasons, mostly because I thought it would be very fun, because pound for pound, I think that you make me laugh more than any other friend. And sometimes I think, are you actually funny, or do we just have some weirdly unique thing? Because out the back I told Lucas something he said at lunch that I found was really funny, so let's just see if the room laughs. Our friend arrived who is gluten intolerant. She was a bit nervous about it, and I read the menu and I said, Murph, it's fine, it says on here, dietary restrictions welcomed. And Mia goes, welcomed? Bullshit, that's passive aggressive. I see, it was funny, I knew that was funny. Recently you made me laugh so hard that I texted you a selfie of myself laughing because tears were like spurting out of my eyes and running down my face. And it was, what started it was that I asked you if any woman in the world has ever found the sight of an adult man playing computer games sexually attractive. And you just banged out hilarious line after hilarious line, and I'm pleased to see that it's made it into your book in the form of some relationship advice. Be wary of adult men who play video games. It suggests they're having some trouble growing up. Imagine if adult women still played with Barbies, just to relax. And at 1 a.m, our partners said, "Oh, come to bed, babe." And we said, "I will soon. I'm just up to a really good bit where the prince comes along on a horse." Another part of your book that I really loved was the opening, which reads, "There are many, many books written by successful women who talk about how successful they are and float their theory about how you can get some of that success for yourself if you just lean in, say yes, make a vision board, live your best life, beat your fear, sleep more. Want it, but not so much that you get less than 8 hours of sleep. Say yes, but make sure you still get those 8 hours. Lean in, but not so far that you fall over. And you should definitely reach for the stars on your way down. Believe in yourself and you can do anything." This is not one of those books. Why did you not want to write one of those type of books?
Because I think that I felt that I was writing a book for a start, not an inspirational meme on Instagram. And I'm so tired of being told like that there is a secret formula for feeling like, oh, now my life's perfect, now it's all... And I think as women we ask each other, how do you do it? I don't know how she does it. How do you get work-life balance? I'm sure you're asked that all the time. And of course the first thing you think is, I don't. And that's because I don't think anyone does, because life is not balanced. And I think that as women we spend so much time trying to live up to these impossible standards, whether it's work-life balance, a thigh gap, trying to look like we've got no wrinkles on our faces, or trying to look like we've got, ripped abs all the time because somehow that's what exercise has become about. I just feel like it all makes women feel bad about themselves, and I wanted to write a book that made women feel reassured and made them feel good about themselves and what they were doing and how they were doing it.
The book is structured into sections: work, strife and balance. So I thought for the purpose of the discussion it'd be good to just follow that structure as well. So let's kick off with work. The worst job you've ever had will teach you a lesson. You will not know this at the time. You write that in the book. When did this happen to you?
I had a disastrous job at Channel 9, which I have written and spoken about before, but I think when I've spoken about it before, I'd still been quite traumatised by it. I mean, in a very first world problem way. But I think I've since learnt that pretty much when we interview people or when we employ people, everyone's got a funny little thing on their CV somewhere. Everyone over a certain age where you're just in a job for not so much time, or you've got a funny little gap. And for me, it was the 7 months I spent at the 9 network. It could have been the 7 network. Sounds just as fun over there. But it was Channel 9, and it was, ironically, the least of my problems was Eddie McGuire. He was the one that wanted me to be there. He was the one that said, I want a woman on my executive team because I've just got men, and women watch television too, or so I'm told. And so the problem is I went over there, and for reasons which I've explained in the book, there are a lot of red flags that I didn't see about why I shouldn't have taken this job. And the fact that I did in the end turned out not to be a bad thing, because I think just like the worst relationship I ever had was the one before I met my husband, the worst job I ever had was the one before I started Mamma Mia. So there is value in screwing up, and that's very much what Channel 9 was for me. It was a massive, massive humiliation and just terrible career experience.
When you came out of it, though, in the immediate days and weeks afterwards, I presume you didn't see it as, well, this will be a valuable learning experience.
Well, I tried to put a positive spin on it. So there was a big story in the paper and that said that I'd been sacked, which I hadn't, but I may as well have been. And my show that I'd tried to do had been axed on the day that I left, and all these people were leaking to me, the press, and there was this big story in the Sydney Morning Herald. And I tried to say, oh, well, at least people will know that I'm available for employment. And I waited for the phone to ring, and the phone never rang. And so it was clear to me that it was a disaster, because it did destroy my reputation, which I had to rebuild. And yeah, it was really bruising. So I think, like anything, the lessons come in hindsight, and now I can see what they were. And I think it was also a bit of a sort of a step between the warm bosom of magazines and then starting Mamma Mia. I think had I not had that uncomfortable experience, I wouldn't have realised I don't want to be an executive anymore. I want to be back on the coalface and creating things in my pyjamas and earning no money.
I'll come in a second to how you made that transition, but you mentioned that you learned some things about the type of jobs that you should take, and you go through them in the book, so I wanted to take you through your advice one by one and get you to elaborate on it a little bit.
This is the closest I'll ever be to becoming the Prime Minister.
I'd thank you to not change the subject and just to answer the questions.
Leigh, I think your heart's not in this. You sexy thing.
Oh, right.
Anyway.
Okay, back to the job advice. Don't take a job that doesn't exist. What does that mean?
It meant that Eddie wanted me, his idea for having me at Channel 9 was good, in that he wanted more input into the executive team. But that wasn't a job. That was just a vibe. And so I should have had another clue that we couldn't come up with a proper job title, and I think we came up with the title of Creative Services Director, and it just wasn't right, but it was getting so close to the time of me starting that we needed to call me something. And then on my first day there, I was introduced to the guy in the office to me, and he said, oh, what are you going to be doing? And I said, I'm Creative Services Director, and he goes, oh, that's my title. Should have been another clue. So I think that if you go into a role that's new, you need it mapped out, you need KPIs, you need a job description, because what I had to do is I had to carve out my job from other people's. I had to carve a Mia-shaped hole from other people's existing jobs, and they didn't like that. So that's, be very wary about. It's different if you join a startup, because at startups no jobs exist, so new jobs are always being created. But in a big company like Channel 9, that job did not exist.
I guess though taking an established job has its own difficulties as well, because someone else has been doing it a certain way, and so that brings challenges too.
Yeah, I think I also, what did success look like in that job? I remember sitting in a boardroom meeting, and they were presenting the, they wanted to get more women and they wanted to do better with women, and they did mean well, I think. But they presented the promos for the cricket season, and it was Lara Bingle in a bikini in, what are they called? Cricket...
Oh, pads.
Pads, yeah. Cricket pads, thanks, Jace. With a cricket bat like this next to the stumps. Oh. And that was their idea of how to appeal to women. And I was sitting in this meeting just going, oh, dear God. And I didn't have any framework to be able to say, there was no structure that had to be passed by me. It didn't occur to anyone to go, well, chicks like this. So it was just, I just knew that I could not change the culture on my own. I just couldn't.
Well, particularly hard when you're the only woman in the room.
Yes.
Because if everyone else thinks it's okay and this is how we've always done it, it's hard to be the dissenting voice. That sort of fits neatly with the second bit of advice you had, which is make sure you're a cultural fit.
Yeah, again, I think that if you've got that... Sometimes, and we see it at Mamma Mia, when there are people that come who are amazing, but they're just not a cultural fit. And I don't mean actual culture. We're not talking about head scarves or skin colour or religion or anything like that, or even necessarily temperament. But if you're the kind of person who really likes a formal, structured, organised work environment, a startup is not going to be for you. If you are pretty free and easy and you want to wear, board shorts and you have trouble being punctual, you better not go into a lawyer's office, If you want to dress like this, best you don't try to work at Channel 9. So you've got to have... There have been some great people that we've had, but the cultural fit just hasn't been right in that they've, whether it's personality or the way you like to work, you need to find a good cultural fit, otherwise you will feel constantly out of place and it's very hard to succeed.
Don't be afraid to rip off the Band-Aid.
Oh yeah, I should have left much earlier than I did. I think that I thought, maybe I'm just out of my comfort zone because it's not women's magazines. So I stayed and I stayed and I stayed and I stayed and I stayed. And I didn't want to make a big deal and I didn't want to make trouble for Eddie because I knew it would be a lot of publicity. I should have just gone a lot earlier than I did.
But is that something you can only know in hindsight, though? Because everything
probably.
You've just said, you would think, I've only been here 5 minutes, maybe I just need time. It's hard to judge.
In some ways, I think if you know, you know. I mean, I think it was so preposterously a bad fit and so disastrous for so many reasons, only some of which I've just explained. I should have gone earlier than I did. Maybe not on the second day, although there have been people who've worked that out. But I probably could have gone after a few months instead of 7. I mean, 7 doesn't sound like anything, but it felt like dog years at the time.
Ask for what you're owed.
Yeah, so when I left, they didn't want to pay me out because the company was owned by the same company that had owned the magazines that I'd worked for. So I'd essentially had almost 16 years with this company, and I was redundant. Eddie had left, and I had a clause in my contract that said I was to report to Eddie Maguire to give him advice. How can you give someone advice if they're not there? So I was redundant, but they just wanted me to quit. And it was really uncomfortable. And I think that what women do so often in relationships and in jobs, we leave because it's uncomfortable. And there's a good reason for that. It's our fight or flight. It's survival. If you feel like you're under threat, whether it's physical, actual danger, or it's just an uncomfortable situation, you are more likely to just go just to get away. But then it makes things that's great in the moment, but it makes things really, really hard on the other side. So I had to fight to get a redundancy, and they said to me things like, we don't want you to quit, we'll just find another job for you. And I said, but what? And they said, you can just be the head of hair and makeup. And I was like, I'm a journalist, let's pretend that you didn't say that. Not that there's anything wrong with being the head of hair and makeup, but that's not what I do. So it was Jason, it was my husband that encouraged me to stay through the discomfort and just get what I was owed. And in the end, I did get a redundancy, and it enabled me to start Mamma Mia with that little bit of cushion because I didn't earn any money for many years.
It's a tricky one, though, and it's something I talk about with my female colleagues where, and I'm not sure if I think it's probably a particularly female way of thinking, which is anytime I've ever been given a promotion, when I ask for more money, I find it hard, and I'm always thinking, but it's a good opportunity, and they're taking a chance on me, and all of that stuff. Whereas I don't know that Kerry O'Brien ever walked in and felt like that.
No, and I used to negotiate against myself. So I would say to Jace, but I don't want to earn too much because then there'll be too much pressure on me to do well.
And he's like, it doesn't work like that. Like after your salary's organised, you in and it's sorted. And I think, what's the expression? Women need to start behaving with the confidence of a mediocre white man. With the greatest respect to all the mediocre white men in the room, we love you, but we don't have your confidence.
So you mentioned earlier the transition between 9 and then having Mamma Mia. So tell us a bit about that.
I'd always worked for a big company. I'd always worked with big groups of, in big groups of people. And at 9, I did get the chance to start a women's daytime chat show. So I got to work with women there. And of course, in magazines I did. So at first I was at home and I was just so relieved to be away from the politics and out of management and in my pyjamas that I was thrilled. But I got really lonely. I loved, though, not being involved in politics anymore. I loved being the politics of any big company. I loved being able to just write something and get it straight up there. And I loved having that back and forth and feedback and comments. I found that exhilarating. But I was working harder and longer than I ever have, all the structures of a big company like an assistant or a courier doc or a marketing department or a finance department or an IT department to help me work out, why my computer won't sync.
So you're doing all of it yourself?
Everything.
All of the content as well?
Yeah, and I remember I'd had an assistant for a long, long time and I remember at one stage I did a giveaway and I had some movie tickets to give away to readers, and I remember my daughter Coco was helping me stick stamps on envelopes and address them, and we went up to the post box and we posted them, and I actually loved that. I loved being hands-on again. I really found that quite exhilarating, but it was a big change of pace, and it was hugely more time-consuming and demanding, but I had less support.
Where did the idea come from? Like, what did you think you wanted to do with I guess, is it fair to say it was a blog at the time?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know what a blog was. So I knew what it was, and I didn't want to do a parenting blog, and I didn't want to do a here's what I've done today blog. But I just wanted a website that I couldn't find, that had all sorts of things about politics or pelvic floors or periods or Gwyneth Paltrow or all of those things at once, because that was how I had conversations. That's how we have conversations. We go from highbrow to lowbrow to no brow. And then we talk about our brows. And that's fine. Like, literally, from Syria to eyebrows. Like, that's just how women talk. And there was nothing that reflected that at the time on the internet. Of course, that's now how Facebook works, and that's what all our feeds are. But back then, that was quite weird. And so I wanted it to be what women were talking about every day.
So you started doing that. How did you even make people aware that, hey, this thing's here and you can click on it?
Well, I was lucky to have a newspaper column. So I had my name at the end of that, the website at the end of that. And then I had Tommy Malone when I was, on the bones of my ass and had no phone calls. Tommy Malone, who was the EP of the Today Show, called me and said, come on. And Will Anderson actually had an afternoon show on Triple M, that's my market, and said, come on and do a slot for 10 minutes every week. And they were the only 2 people that called me and offered me anything. And so I used old media to make people aware that, and it was before social media, so I made people aware of that. And I also made sure that I started it. I knew I was leaving 9, and I knew there would be a lot of publicity around when I left 9, so I made sure that it was up and that my first comment about that went on Mamma Mia.
Oh, yeah, right.
So it went live literally the day before my resignation was announced.
You mentioned you were just working crazy hours and doing it all yourself. Did you burn out?
Very much, very much. So I was burning out physically then. What I've since learnt is that creative people can also burn out from doing the same thing again and again, which was a few years in my future. But I was feeling really, really burnt out, and the site was growing, and I was lucky enough to have, a few people who'd been commenters who were volunteering and helping me out, just because sometimes I didn't even have anyone to bounce things off. Like, should I post this? Should I not post that? So I ended up becoming quite friendly with this group of commenters who were really sweet to give me advice and just sort of helped out with moderating comments and things. But I was exhausted. And of course, if there wasn't me, I got pregnant during this time, and I probably would have gone back to an executive media job just because it felt hard and I felt irrelevant. And I got pregnant with Remy, and I know there's no such thing when you own your own business as maternity leave. So I had to load. I knew I'd want about a week or 2 off when he was born. Hello. And so I preloaded, 5? I decided I'd cut it down from like 6 or 7 posts a day to maybe 4. And so I preloaded, 30 posts around the time I was due to give birth. And
I just feel tired hearing that.
I know. And so then he came 10 days early. So I had to quickly, I'm in labour and I'm trying to change the dates on the preloading of the thing. And I took that time off. So then I had a baby and I was just exhausted. And if Jace hadn't stepped in at that stage, I don't know what would have happened because I wanted to grow, but I didn't know how.
So then you figured out, I want to grow, it's bigger than this. What do we do next? And you say you brought Jason in. So then what did you do?
Well, Jace brought himself in. So he was looking for something to invest in and he sort of saw that I was struggling and was like, maybe there's an investment opportunity right here in front of me. And I was a bit slightly taken aback when he suggested it, but also, oh my God, that would be amazing because I couldn't afford to hire anyone. I had some friends helping out, but it wasn't enough and I knew I couldn't rely on them too much. Because it wasn't fair. So when he said, let's try to monetize that, I'll take over the business side, the strategy side, all of that. And I was just like, what have I got to lose? I've got everything to gain by this. And it was, everyone sort of says, oh, how do you work with your husband? That would be really hard.
I was just going to say, what have you got to lose? Maybe your relationship with your husband. Yeah.
That's right. But, I was so exhausted anyway that it could only be a bonus. And I've since realised that us both pulling in the same... Because it's so all-consuming, and it still is so all-consuming, the fact that we're both pulling in the same direction, Jason and I often say... Because I've got friends who either one of them's involved in their own business and the other partner works for themselves, and Jason and I he's always had his own business, but we used to be that. I worked for Kerry Packer and he had his own business. And sometimes you've got two businesses in the same family, and it's never... quite, you've always got really conflicting pressures. So while as tough as it's been, at least we've been pulling in the same direction and we can talk about it. But there were rules that we had to make early on, like when we got an office, driving to work in different cars. That was really important to me. Sorry, environment. And working in very different parts of the business and having different areas that we specialise in. But we still had a struggle, I think, up until a few years ago, would you say, Jace? And then I realised, because I was a bit I remember that BRW came to do a story on us, like a business magazine, and they wanted to take a photo and they suggested that I sit in a chair and he stand up. And I was all like, no, because I might not have said this, but I thought that seems sexist. I think I should be standing up and he should be sitting down, or we should both be. And it was my ego was really wrestling for supremacy. And then it occurred to me that I don't want to be the CEO of the company. I can't, firstly, I couldn't. I don't have the skills or the interest in that area. So once I relinquished my ego and went, how about I do what I'm good at and you do what you're good at? And then the missing link was when we hired Kylie Rogers as our managing director, it all came together and it's okay, divide and conquer. It's much better.
One of the other parts of your book that I liked, because I felt like it resonated with me, is a bit where you've written, fuck your dreams. That's the title of the self-help book for millennials that my 27-year-old friend Kate wants to write, and I think it would be a bestseller. My suggestions to her for chapters include: stop reaching for the stars. You're not as good a singer as you think. Even if you can sing, that doesn't mean you should be a singer.
Leigh Sales.
Take a TAFE course instead of making a vision board. Believing in yourself won't pay your bills. Just because you really want something doesn't mean you'll get it. You're not as special as your mum says you are. Nobody cares about your journey. Why are you not a believer in the, just believe in yourself, follow your dreams? Why are you not a believer in that vibe?
Because I think if that was that easy, our cancer wards would be empty. There wouldn't be parents struggling with sick children. There wouldn't be people who are unemployed or homeless. I think just wanting something a lot doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily get it. I think that, and I also think in terms of your career, you can have a dream and you can have a passion, but you shouldn't necessarily expect that to pay your bills, you know? And I think that just because something isn't your job doesn't mean it doesn't have value, which sort of comes back to the also working for free, which is a slightly different point. But I just think that you're not owed your dream. You are not owed your dream. Just because you want to be a singer, that doesn't mean you are owed...
I feel like you're talking to me again.
You are not owed a musical, Leigh Sales.
What do you think would have happened to you if you had been born in an era when women, once they get married, you couldn't work?
Wow. I don't know. I don't think it would have been good for my anxiety, just quietly. I would have probably tried to find meaning or distraction somewhere else. I know that there are women I know who have chosen to stop work, and some of them treat the schoolyard as their business or as their office, or they treat their children as their business. And that's not dissing those women, but I can kind of see when you look at it from a distance, I'm like, you need a job, or you need something that's not about your kids or their life, because you are really smart and you need, it's like a cattle dog. You need a job. You need an activity. You need a purpose that's not just about your kids, because just like a man's not a financial plan, your kids will get to the point, if you're doing it right, where they don't need you and they don't want you in their life as much. And that can be, as fulfilled as I am by my job, I found Luca's last year of school, which I write about in the book, just to be absolutely gut-wrenching. And I'm, he writes in the book, have not been the most diligent of parents in terms of being the one with the lunches and the school carnivals. I've never been that kind of mum. And even I found it absolutely gut-wrenching. If I'd have been a full-time stay-at-home mum for all of his life, I would have had a complete existential crisis that was even worse than the one I had.
And I know it was a relief to me before I had kids, because I said, I'm sort of worried about playing and stuff. I find when I have to see children play with them, it's boring. And you were like, oh God, it's so boring. You just got to, it's just part of the thing.
It took me a long time though to be able to admit that, because I used to feel like such a failure because I didn't like to be on the floor playing with Barbies, even at that age. Funnily enough, being an adult woman, I didn't like getting on the floor doing puzzles and playing dress-ups and stuff. And I remember a therapist saying to me, of course you don't. That's because you're an adult. There's a reason that's what kids do. It's not meant to be fun. That's not to say there's not value in doing it.
Yeah.
And I still did it, but I felt bad that I didn't enjoy doing it. It's like there's that show at the moment, 13 Reasons. And I've been saying to people who've got kids around the sort of 12-plus age, watch that show. And they're like, oh, but I just don't want to. And I'm like, I know you don't want to. It's not like something to do for fun. It's something to do for homework. It's like learning how Snapchat works. Not for fun, because you need to. So there's lots of things that we have to do as parents that we don't do for fun. But I think that I also felt relieved when I realised that there were lots of people, in fact, most people, who didn't like getting on the floor and playing. Or as one of my girlfriends described it, death by park. And then my kids, a couple of years ago, I'm like, come on, guys, let's go to the park. And then they're like, Mum, we hate the park. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me sooner? So it's great, we don't go to the park anymore.
Let's move into strife.
Strife.
You are a very open person. You've said yourself that you have no filter. Have you ever shared something about yourself where afterwards you've thought, oh, geez, you know what, I just actually wish I'd never said that publicly?
No, when I first wrote about in most cases I find that when I share, there's this beautiful circle of female support, that there's always a risk in sharing, because people could go, weirdo, that's not normal. But in every case, whether it's been about losing a baby or about anxiety or anything or about not enjoying playing, women have gone, oh, thank God, me too. And that's this perfect feedback loop of them. I've made them feel better, and then they've made me feel better. And neither of us are abnormal. And so, there've been times when I've found the feedback a little bit difficult to manage. Like, I suppose when I wrote about anxiety, and there was a writer for Crikey who wrote this thing of, who cares? Why did Mia write this? No one wants to hear it. She shouldn't have written about the medication she takes. And just wrote about 5,000 words just writing me off. And my dad kindly wrote back to him on my behalf. But I've learnt to be very detached from how things are received. I decided that what people think of what I write is actually not my business. And as long as I'm good, in the last couple of weeks since that article came out in Stella about Luca's chapter in my book, and there have been all these things apparently saying I'm a bad mother. And people have said, does it upset you to be called a bad mother? And I'm like, well, if my children call me a bad mother, yeah, absolutely, I'll be gutted. But if some, loser living in a basement that I've never heard of who wants to write a comment on the Daily Mail calls me a bad mother, I'm fine with that.
I'll come back and talk about Luca's part in the book shortly, but is there anything that you feel that you can't talk about publicly?
My kids, I have to be really careful, and my husband, and sex. You should see the death stare I'm getting now. So I think that what's always been difficult for me is knowing, and as any first-person writer and as any person in the public eye, my life is entangled with other people's lives. And, that's why I've sort of cautioned parenting bloggers that at a certain point your kids are not going to want you to write about them, and they don't, and that's really frustrating because the material gets so good around the time that they become aware. But like Coco and Remy are really hard line. Luca was very hard line for a long time and is still quite untrusting of me and my boundaries. Jason has always been like mystery man and does not want to be written about or spoken about, and I have to respect all of that while still being honest about what I go through. So there are some things I can't be honest about because they're happening to people that are close to me, and then they're not my stories to tell.
And sometimes too, when time's elapsed, there are things that at the time you wouldn't write about, but then when a lot of years have gone by. For example, in the book you write about that you and Jason separated for a period of time, quite a long time ago now, and then you got back together again. Now that is now a long time in the past.
Exactly. And I used to, that's what's so interesting about the internet now is that people write things immediately when they're happening. And I think that can make for a lot of uninteresting just word vomit and word salad out there. I think that I didn't write about there are things that I don't write about for 10 years or even 20 years after they happen, and I think that's because I wouldn't have written well about losing a baby or having anxiety or Jason and I splitting up at the time because I had no perspective, I had no context for that. It's only with time comes wisdom, with hindsight comes wisdom. So, yeah. One
of the things that happened to you a long time ago, 30 years ago actually, you write about how the first time you had sex, the condom broke and that you feared you were pregnant at 15.
I did. My mum's in the audience. That was a happy Mother's Day, wasn't it, Mum? Yeah, that was bad. And again, I'd never written about that either.
And so what happened when, not when the condom broke, but when you... When you've realised, oh my God, I've had sex for the first time, the condom's broken, and maybe I'm pregnant, and what should I do about that? What as a 15-year-old, went through your head?
The first thing I wanted to do was tell my mum, which is a tantamount to the strength of our relationship, that she made me feel that I could tell her that. I knew she'd be pissed off, but I also knew that she'd support me. And she was like textbook amazing in what she did in terms of just a lesson in that she was supportive and she said, if you are pregnant, and of course neither of us knew about emergency contraception, which is a shame, because we could have sorted things out that day, but she said, I wish you'd have waited. I'll be by your side, but you're going to have to sort out the consequences of this. And by that she meant that I would have to look into where to get a termination and what to do. And I was so shocked that she was leaving such a big adult thing to me. Like, why was she just not fixing this for me? And I think as a parent, I know I rush in to try to fix everything for my kids. And that was a really smart thing that she did. So I felt completely supported, but also, how else could I have learnt how adult it was? Like, if you're adult enough to have sex, you've got to be adult enough to deal with the consequences. And so that was invaluable. And I wasn't pregnant, but I was looking down the barrel of really adult decisions.
What do you think is the best way to give sex education to young people, and how have you approached it with your kids?
Well, there's a chapter in the book, a letter to my sons about porn, which I'll also get my daughter to read when they're around 13, like not now. I think what's so different about our kids and the conversations we have around sex is porn. And I think the conversations our parents had to have, and my mum made sure that I knew about contraception, and it didn't help. Well, it did help because I tried, but accidents happen. But I knew the birds and the bees from a really, really young age in a very, very matter-of-fact way. I think now what's so important is, yes, the facts are important, but so is learning to deconstruct porn, because unlike when we had sex for the first time, our kids will have sex...
Not us. I just want to be
That's
clear
my next
about
book. Our kids will have their sexual awakening with hundreds of hours of porn in their minds. And not just boys, but girls as well, which is terrifying. So, I think it's really important to explain things like, learning about sex from porn is like learning about driving from watching Formula One. It's like, that's stunt sex. That's not real life. So I think that, because I know every parent wants to talk to their kid about sex as much as every kid wants to talk to their parents about sex. But this is one that you cannot leave to the peers, because all the peers are also just watching porn. So it's really, really important, and it's important to tell boys that watching too much porn makes you really bad at sex. True story. True story. There are studies that show that. And you watch boys go, oh, what?
You mentioned before about Luca writing a chapter in the book. Where did that idea come from to let him do that?
It came actually from me reading Amy Poehler's book, Yes Please, and Seth Meyers wrote a chapter in her book, and I thought, looking down the barrel of Deadline...
Is that her husband? Or?
No, It was one of her co-hosts on Saturday Night Live, like
right.
a close friend.
Right.
And I thought, oh, I like the idea of someone else writing a chapter that I don't have to write. It's one less chapter I have to write. And I thought, instead of me writing about parenting, because I've done that in the past, and also how interesting is it, why don't I let Luca have a go? And he's often joked that maybe he'd, one day, wouldn't it be funny if people knew what you were really like as a mother? So I just said, well how about it? And, he was a bit slow with the deadline. This is before he'd worked at Mamma Mia and had learned to meet digital writing deadlines, and so he was a little bit slow. It was his gap year, so he was probably drunk most of it. But he got there and he submitted this chapter, and I didn't touch it. Like, I was going to write notes in the margin, but then I thought, no, just let him have his say, because whether I want to argue this point or argue that point or defend myself, it's how he felt about the experience of having me as a mother. And even though it was among the hardest things I've ever had to read, harder than any therapy session I've ever had to have, it was incredibly instructive and helpful. And I've got girlfriends who've said they've learnt so much about parenting, probably what not to do, by reading Luca's chapter.
But also, even though I'm sure it was hard to read, I mean, looking at it from the outside, I thought, oh my God, if my son turned out like Luca, I would be so happy. Like, so sort of emotionally intelligent, but also really loves his mum and protective of you, and,
Yeah, and to me also, there were a couple of years, like most mothers with their sons, when he really had to pull away, and that gutted me because I never knew if he'd come back. And so I think because none of my friends have kids the same age as mine, your kids are still so little, for example, and most of our friends don't have a 19-year-old. There was so much of my parenting of him in the last few years that I'd never read anything about and never heard anything about, and emotions and experiences that I felt so unprepared for as he grew through his teen years. And that was, my relationship with him has always been incredibly close, and I just wasn't ready for a lot of the transitions that we'd have to make, and that his chapter really helped me understand that, and I hope my chapter about him leaving school and our relationship will help other mums as well.
His chapter finished with, he wrote all of these amazing things that you've achieved and all the crazy things that you do that drive him mad, and then he wrote, but that's all meaningless because really I see none of that. I mean, sure, it's there. Mia Freedman is all of those things and so many more. But really, when I look at her, I just see my mum, my best friend. Oh, God, I'm going to cry. The woman I love and idolise and respect and simply cannot live without, and who thankfully, now that I can drive and order an Uber, I no longer have to rely on to drop me anywhere. You wrote about having a nervous breakdown.
I did.
What happened?
That was great. I went to a health farm and it didn't end well. I realised in hindsight that I've had generalised anxiety disorder my whole life. And I didn't realise that until I started taking medication and it went away. And I was like, life doesn't have to be that hard. Like that feeling in my stomach that's there all the time, that's not about anything, can go away, and that's not normal, and most people don't live with that. So I had a panic attack, and I had never had a panic attack before, and it wasn't like the ones that some of my friends get and the ones that you see where it's like chest pains and I can't breathe. I became convinced that I had cancer. I had a pain in my side, and of course that's what it had to be. So I didn't go to the doctor or anything. I just, was convinced, went through the emotional stages of, I was in the final stages of my life. It was just crazy magical thinking. And it went for about 10 or 11 days. And I was in such, it was like there was someone chasing me around with a knife. Like, that's how scared I felt. And I was going about, like, there are some pictures in the book around that time. I was in Byron Bay, it was our summer holiday, I was surfing, I was doing all these things, I was having coffee with girlfriends, and you couldn't see from the outside, and I didn't tell anyone because somehow that would make it more real. And I finally got courage to ring a girlfriend of mine after about 11 days who I knew suffered from depression, and I just knew that she wouldn't judge me. And she was amazing. She said, an ex-boyfriend of hers had this same thing where he imagined that he'd had cancer, and she put me on hot contact with him, and then I spoke to my therapist and ended up seeing a psychiatrist who specialises in anxiety and was prescribed medication, and I was really nervous about going on medication, as lots of people are. But it was truly, truly life-changing, truly life-changing. And it's not that I don't get stressed anymore or nervous or anything like that, and sometimes I even still get a little bit of anxiety. But stress is, like we were talking before we came on about whether we get nervous or not and giving big speeches and being, standing up on a stage in front of all these people. Nervous is different, and stress is fine. I can be stressed at work and stressed and overwhelmed and all of that. Anxiety is different. Anxiety is sitting at home, drinking a cup of tea with a feeling in your body like you are being chased around the house or that you are in imminent danger.
In the Strife section of the book, you write also about body image, and one of the things that I most admire about you is how much of a campaigner you are about women feeling comfortable in their own bodies. And there's a really insightful bit in the book where you're writing about how when you see women that you know and they've had work done on their face, you felt sad about it. You thought, oh, that poor woman, she must look in the mirror and feel bad about herself that she has to inject her face or put fillers into it or whatever. But then something caused you to rethink, and then you realised, and you wrote, that you realised, I was never angry with the women or sad for them. I'm angry at society, and I'm sad for myself. Being vain and competitive, it makes me furious to know that if I want to be considered attractive, I must play by the rules being forced upon me by a culture that fetishises youth and Anglo flawlessness. Women older than 22, darker than a spray tan or larger than a size 8 have a heavily reduced currency.
Yeah.
Even when you believe that, how do you then apply it in your own life and not give in to thinking, oh God, I'll just...
Well, I'm still on the fence about Botox, and tortured about Botox, as I keep asking all these women for permission, because that's become the baseline, but I'm really conflicted about that, and I'm still, I don't judge other women for having it, but I sort of judge myself. It's an ongoing thing. It's not like I go, I just love my body all the time. It helps, like in the same way that I said to you, when you confess something and other people go, oh yeah, me too, it makes you feel more normal. So confronting stomach, when I looked down at my stomach one time, I'd just been exercising and I sat down on a mat on the, to do some stretches, and I just looked at my stomach and it looked a lot like that. I drew a little love heart on confronting stomach today. And I just thought, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel inadequate. I didn't feel like, oh God, And so I just took a little photo and didn't think anything of it and put it on Instagram, and with a view to say, this is what, I'm 45 years old, I've had 3 kids that have grown in there, this is what my stomach looks like. Because when you flick through Instagram, it's like the same feeling I used to get flicking through magazines. You feel completely abnormal. Like suddenly exercise has been taken over by all these hard-bodied people, and that's become the purpose of exercise, taking a photo of yourself in the mirror. And I exercise for anxiety, and I exercise for a bunch of things, and mental health. And so I don't have to make breakfast for the kids in the morning. Love you. And didn't think anything of it. And then you texted me the next day, and you had a link to this story in the Daily Mail that had Mia Freedman posts confronting photo. And you said, Syria, Donald Trump as president, Mia Freedman's stomach confronting. Which made me laugh. And then I'm just laughing, and the kids were watching me and watching my reaction, and I was laughing, and I became aware particularly of Coco, my daughter, and when you're a mother, you realise that your daughter's always, after a certain age, your daughter's always watching you to see how to be a woman, really. And she said, why are you laughing? Most normal mothers would be freaking out. And I said, darling, the problem isn't me. The problem is that the media thinks that a normal stomach of a 45-year-old woman is somehow confronting, and that's just fake news. That's just shouldn't be true. So it's an ongoing thing, but that helps me because then other people go, oh, thanks, my stomach looks like that too, and I want other people to feel good about their stomachs, and I deliberately want to widen, quite literally, the spectrum of what female bodies look like publicly, what public depictions we have of female bodies.
These ones weren't put out publicly, but I'm just thinking of a time where a friend of ours was having a very hard time, and her former husband's new girlfriend put an Instagram photo of her own bum, which was a pretty immaculate, amazing bum. And our friend sent it to us and went, wow, I've just thought I was at rock bottom, now I've got to look at this bum. And so we all then took what we call belfies, which is bum selfies, to send to cheer her up. Not exposed bums, just in our PJs or whatever, but it was just...
because that's what women do. We make each other feel better by exposing our own vulnerability, and that's how you find solidarity and reassurance, I think.
So balance. You love to say that balance is bullshit. What does that mean?
Well, I think that when you're a woman in the public eye, you get asked a lot about work-life balance. And there's a real subtext in that. It's always very loaded. It's like, are you a bad mother, is basically the question. You've got a job and you've got kids. Who are you shortchanging today? Like, how are you doing it? Who's suffering for your choices today? And I think that, I'm a Libra. I'm meant to want to have balance. And there's nothing wrong with making sure you don't just work and that you remember to stop and smell the roses. But I think that's fine as a broad concept. But we've become, as women particularly, obsessed with it being this ideal state. And if you can't live up to it all the time, you're somehow failing. And in actual fact, who gets to choose the stuff of life? Who gets to choose? You don't get to choose when the budget's on. I don't get to choose when I lose a baby. You don't get to choose when you're diagnosed with cancer. You don't get to choose when your parent falls over and breaks their hip and needs more care. You don't get to choose the stuff that throws your life wildly off balance. And having like 100 women work for me, Jason and I are sort of interviewing women and Kylie all the time, and we talk to women and we see what they're up to in their lives and of course the staff that we have. And what we see is that women are always having things happen in their life. It's a child with special needs, it's a parent that they need to help care for. And not only that they feel bad, that they've got to lean in a certain way, they've got to lean in somewhere else, and then you've got someone else that says, oh, I'm starting this new big project at work and I feel that I don't have work-life balance. And I'm like, this is a short-term thing. You're launching a whole new vertical or whatever. If you were completely balanced, you wouldn't be doing a very good job. And don't pile guilt on top of the struggles that you're already going to have with having to scale down work to help look after your parents for a while. So I think it's the reason we all feel inadequate and guilty when we have to lean one way or the other way is this idea of work-life balance.
But as an employer,
yes,
isn't there some level of irritation for you if somebody isn't doing as good a job as they normally do because they're looking after their parents?
No, well, if there was, with 100 women, you would be irritated the whole time because women are the ones that have to bear the brunt of caretaking, of children, of parents. So it's something that we deal with, of having babies, all the time. So I think that that you just have to build that in. You just have to factor that in as a default. And I think the more that we do that for men as well, the better it will be for all of us.
I know that you take a lot of value in your friendships with women. How do your friendships with women differ from your friendships with men?
Well, there's more belfies in my friendships with women. I've got a few guy friends, but... I don't have a huge number of male friends. I think probably because I've always worked with women, except for Channel 9, I don't really have a lot of friends from my time at Channel 9. My guy friends tend to be married to my girlfriends, so we'll see them as couples.
Right.
But then I have to see girlfriends at least once a week. Because I used to think that your partner gave you everything, and then I realised that's too much pressure to put on any one person. So I think that it's really helpful to supplement the emotional, what you get from your husband or your partner, with your friends as well.
And so that puts a bit of gas in your tank?
Oh, very much. Girlfriends are not a side dish for me. They are one of the main burners. There's friendship, work, kids, partner. It's very much those four things.
How does one euthanize a friendship? Or is it euthanize?
Euthanize a friendship. Yeah. You let it die of benign neglect. And well, there's two ways. You can blow it up, which is usually dramatic and feels like it'll be satisfying but ultimately isn't and is really quite disruptive in your life. Or you can just let it fade away. And sometimes I think, I write in the book that people come into your life for a reason, a season or a lifetime. And not every friendship has to be for a lifetime. I think that there are, I've got some people who I've worked with at Cosmo and at Mamma Mia over the years who, our friendship was forged in the fire of work and they were my work wives, some of them, and we had hugely intense, close relationships because we work together. But when they leave or life changes or they have a baby or move interstate, you can't stay that close with everyone throughout your life. And I think you can't, if you stayed as close as you were to everyone at school and everyone in Mother's Group and everyone at university and everyone in every job you've ever had, it's just not possible. So I think that friendships sort of, can come and go. But then there are people, in terms of euthanizing, sometimes you can become aware that a friendship is toxic and is not good for you. And in the case of this particular friend, who was actually a guy, I became aware that every time I saw him, I felt used, pissed off, frustrated, angry, and it was just not a single positive emotion.
Yeah.
And so I just went, you know what, I'm done. This is not giving me back anything.
So how would you describe your sort of level of happiness and your, ability to be settled in your mid-40s versus your mid-30s versus your mid-20s?
So much. And I don't know whether that's just the medication talking. But the very wise Jennifer Aniston once said, it's crucial to have therapy in your 30s if you want to enjoy your 40s. And I couldn't agree with that more. I know that my friends who had therapy and worked their shit out in their 30s are enjoying their 40s far much more. Not that difficult things don't happen, but you know yourself. And it's not that I don't still go to therapy very occasionally for a tune-up, but I know myself for better and worse. And so you've just got all of these tools. And I think that the older you get, the less Fs you give about what people think of you. And so I found my 20s very, very, very difficult and challenging and traumatic in parts. I found my 30s, very full on. And my 40s, I am so far really, really, really enjoying. I'm enjoying my friends. I'm enjoying knowing who I am. I'm enjoying not sweating the small stuff. I was watching... From a personal level, I'm enjoying knowing in business what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. Like, I've taken a step back from the management of our business. I'm not involved in it anymore. I just am on the creative side. And boy, is everyone happy about that, particularly me. Because, I've come to accept things about myself a lot more than I did.
So with therapy, I want to know, because I've never, done therapy. And so... I always think about this bit in Crocodile Dundee where Linda Kowalski's talking about having therapy and Paul Hogan says...
Speaking of Belfies, yeah.
Paul Hogan says, what's that? And she explains it. And then he goes, don't you have any mates?
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah.
what happens at therapy? Have
you really not been to therapy?
I've been to an occasional visit to a psychologist, but I've never gone every week to just...
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right,
so,
what happens
as I would understand it from what I see on TV, where they sort of say nothing and you talk, but then you somehow work something out of it.
Yeah, well, different. That's how it works. And then you give them lots of money.
Is that how it works?
And you say thank you.
Is that how it works?
So I've got friends who go, but I don't need to go to therapy. I've just got, yoga is my therapy. Or I've just got mates, and that's how it works. The problem is that a good therapist will tell you things that you don't want to hear. They will hold a mirror up to you and make you look at things that might not be very attractive. But your mates probably won't want to do that because they love you and because it's awkward and because they've got skin in the game, They're invested in whatever it is that's going on for you. So for me, I've seen different therapists at different times, and you've got to have the right match, and every therapist has a different way of working. But, it's not like lie down and tell me about your childhood. I mean, it can be, but I found that I used to go to therapy, and this is fine to do, but to deal with crises. So, I lost a baby, go to therapy. Marriage broke down, go to therapy.
That's when I've gone to therapy.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say therapy, I wouldn't call it therapy, but yeah.
Well, that's like emergency triage, Like, quick, patch you up, bandage that up and put you on your way.
Right.
But the therapy that I did after Jason and I split up, when I went sort of once a week for 2 years, was about, yes, dealing with the aftermath of that, but also looking a little bit deeper. And in many ways, the best therapy you do is when you're not having a crisis. When you just realise that maybe there are some recurring patterns in your life that are happening. Maybe there's something that, you know, you keep having the same relationship, or you keep having the same thing happen at work, or you keep having fallouts with friends, or you're dealing with an ongoing issue like losing a child, or divorce, or something, or infertility, and you want to work on it. So it's more like personal training, I guess.
Thanks for listening to this episode of No Filter. I had so much fun being interviewed by Leigh. And you can buy... Did you know I wrote a book? I know. I've been keeping it secret. I have barely told anyone. You can buy my new book, Work Strife Balance, pimpmybook.com. No. By going to iBooks. Don't go to pimpmybook.com because I don't even know what that is. I just made it up. Instead, go to iBooks at apple.co/mamamia. And this is also where you can subscribe to all our shows in one place. If you haven't already got our Pink podcast app, which is much easier because we are launching shows faster than we can tell you about them. We're about to launch another podcast, which I'm very excited about because it's about Trump. And if you have ever listened to me talk or write or say anything in the last 12 or so months, you'll know my obsession with US politics and the sentient Cheeto that is... Well, he looks a bit like a twisty, doesn't he? Or a Cheezel. That is Trump.
Can you actually believe a bankrupt reality TV star is the president of the United States?
So big, so strong, so powerful.
That a man who brags about grabbing women by the pussy now has the nuclear codes?
They're terrific.
I'm Amelia Lester. I'm an Australian journalist living in Washington, and sometimes when life feels a little bit crazy over here, I like to ring my friend Mia Freedman and say to her, Mia, tell me it's going to be okay.
Hello.
Mia.
Amelia.
Are you in the cupboard?
I'm in the cupboard.
It sounds amazing. Well, now it's a podcast. Join me and Mia as we cover the insanity that is the White House and then distract you with all the pop culture and anything else that can take your mind off Trump. Tell me it's going to be okay. Where we tell you it's going to be okay. Or we think. Or maybe we're not sure. Subscribe in iTunes or the Mamma Mia podcast app and find out.
Anyway, back to No Filter. If you want to suggest a guest or just ask me a question or leave a comment about any of our podcasts, actually, call the pod phone on 02 8999 9386 or flick me an email at podcasts@mamamia.com.au. You're also welcome to leave comments there or suggestions for the program. Please tell a friend about our podcasts. There are a lot of people who don't even know what a podcast is still. It really helps us to keep making more podcasts for you if you go to iTunes and leave us a review and subscribe, and also tell your friends. Use the little share button at the top of either your podcast feed or an individual episode. It really, really, really helps. Today's show was produced by the delightful Elissa Ratliff for the Mamma Mia Women's Network. The executive producer of podcasts is Monique Bowley, and the head of entertainment is Holly Wainwright. My name's Mia Freedman. You can find me at miafreedman.com or on any of the many Mamma Mia platforms. I will see you soon. Lots of love. Bye.